Welcome to LIBTalks. Our guest this month is Don Watkins, President of the Blount Library Trustees and Vice President of the Chautauqua-Cattaraugus Library System Trustees.
Hey, I'm Don Watkins, and I'm here today to talk about Raspberry Pi, which is a fascinating single-board computer that I've been gaining more and more experience with over the last probably 4 years. I brought a Raspberry Pi with me to show you, and you can see that I can easily fit it in the palm of my hand, so it's very small, but yet very powerful. It has 4 USB ports. It has an Ethernet port, and believe it or not, it has a built-in wireless. And unlike a traditional computer, it's got a micro SD card, which is a flash drive card. And the typical Raspberry Pi nowadays comes with about a 16 gig card, although this particular model came with a 32. Now that's going to be more than enough space for you to install software on. Okay, so, and I wanted to talk about making a Raspberry Pi in the library. One of my best friends and a member of our own board, when she heard that I was going to be talking about Raspberry Pis, thought I was talking about something that you eat. But in fact, I'm not. I'm talking about something that you can make. You can make a great deal of things with a Raspberry Pi. And so I got a little picture here on the display of what I showed you. Maybe that's easier for you to see. And you probably want to know how you can get a Raspberry Pi. Now you can buy them online. You can buy them from Amazon. You can buy them from a company called Adafruit. Or on the screen here you see the Raspberry Pi product page from the Raspberry Pi website. They list some other places that you can buy Raspberry Pis from. Okay, this is the Raspberry Pi Model 3. The original Raspberry Pi, which came out about 4 years ago, was a Raspberry Pi 1, and it did not have built-in wireless, and it was a much slower processor. Today's Raspberry Pi, the one that I'm holding in my hand, has a quad-core microprocessor, which is very powerful. It comes with 1 gigabyte of RAM, and it has built-in wireless. You can't see it, but it's in here. And so that's very handy when you're making things. So now you actually have two Ethernet ports on here. You have a wired port, which is I think it's 100 megabit, could be a gig, I'm not sure. And the wireless is wireless N. So it's the fastest wireless available on the market today. So the next thing I want to show you is how do you get started. Okay, so after you get your Raspberry Pi, and you want to be careful because it's an electronic device. You want to it doesn't like static electricity, so try not to expose it to electric shocks, or you'll be shocked that it won't work anymore. This particular one has a base, and many Raspberry Pi kits come with a case that you can put the Raspberry Pi in, and the case allows you to still have access to the ports. Okay. Besides the Ethernet port, it has an HDMI port, and most of you probably have an LCD TV in your home, or certainly in the library, that you can connect to. Now there's also a composite video port, which you may be familiar if you're old enough to remember an Apple II computer. You could hook it up, but the video quality is nowhere near as good as it is with HDMI. And many of the kits that are sold today for Raspberry Pi come with an HDMI cable, but you could easily buy one yourself for $6 or $7 at a local store. The Raspberry Pi is powered by electricity. Now there's a couple different ways you can power it. You can power it on the wall, from the wall, with this particular adapter, and it has a micro USB which fits into the side of the Raspberry Pi and allows you to power it. Alternatively, you could use a USB power pack, but you'd still need to have this particular cable because the only way in is a micro USB, okay? On the top of the Pi are some pins, and there are certain add-on boards that you can get. You can get a camera, for example, that plugs in here, so you can use the Raspberry Pi to take photos, okay? One of the projects that I recently worked on used a brick Pi add-on board which plugged in like so on the Raspberry Pi and allowed me to interface with a Lego Mindstorms robot. So I actually ran a Lego Mindstorms robot. Instead of using the EV3 brick, we actually used the Raspberry Pi. So it has a great deal of functionality and a great deal of adaptability and expandability. You can see on the screen here that the connecting pieces, I kind of explained that already, but this little graphic helps to illustrate that. The red device, the red plug is HDMI. On the left-hand side, you can see where the micro or the memory card goes in. And at first, it took me a while to find that. It just pulls out and puts back in its very small card. And then the USB slots. Now, why would you want USB? Well, unless you're going to use this as a standalone device, and even if you do that, you're still going to need a mouse and a keyboard to communicate with a Raspberry Pi, just like you would with any other computer. So with the 4 USB slots, you can easily plug a mouse in, a USB mouse, and a USB keyboard. You can also add some other USB peripherals if you want to, but typically that's all you need. The software, that's an interesting thing, you know. Most of the time when you get software, it comes preloaded on your computer and you don't even have to think about it. On a Raspberry Pi, you get what's called, if you buy a kit from CanaKit or from Amazon or the software that's mentioned here on the screen, it's called a NUBS, which stands for New Out-of-the-Box Software. Now you might want to know what's on NUBS. Well, as you probably know, most computers require an operating system. The Raspberry Pi has an operating system, and its operating system is Linux, typically. It runs on a special build of Debian Linux called Raspbian. And when you get NUBS, and you put your little disk in the side, and you have all your keyboard and your mouse and your LCD monitor connected, and you turn it on for a first-time boot, it's going to give you some choices. And one of those choices is to install Raspbian, and that's what I would do first. Okay, Raspbian it's a graphical interface. It's very much like Windows 10. It's very much like the Mac. And it's something that you'll be familiar with. There are some additional choices if you get a little bit more experienced with a Pi, and they're displayed on the screen now. One of those is Ubuntu Mate. Ubuntu is another version of Linux. It's related to Debian, and it's kind of a lightweight interface. It also has Ubuntu Snappy. There's also an option for Windows 10 IoT. IoT, you may know, stands for Internet of Things. Internet of Things is like a weather station, for example, okay? So you can build weather stations with a Raspberry Pi, and then there's some other options listed as well. We're not going to get into that right now. That's more advanced work than you need to know at this particular time. On your screen now, you should be able to see the Pixel desktop. This is the graphical user interface that you'll get the first time that you boot up the Raspberry Pi. And as you can see, it looks very much like what you're used to. Very much like a Windows computer, okay? Now, one of the things that you get with Raspberry Pi, or I should say one of the things, the big thing about using open source software, and particularly the Debian Raspbian version of open source software, is you're going to get thousands of free software packages. Unlike proprietary operating systems where you have to go out and buy a word processor and buy a spreadsheet and buy a presentation software. All of this stuff is included. Okay, and what I've demonstrated here is you have the LibreOffice suite. It's an entire Office suite, very similar to Microsoft Office. It includes a word processor, a presentation, a database, and spreadsheet applications. As a matter of fact, I do most of the writing that I do. Personally, I use LibreOffice. It's great stuff. I got my last master's degree using LibreOffice, or actually OpenOffice, which forked and became LibreOffice. In addition to that, Pixel also includes a lot of programming software, including Python. Python is a very popular open source programming language, and it also includes Scratch. Scratch is an open source programming language developed at MIT, specifically to teach young people how to code. It's a lot of fun to use Scratch. In addition to that, you've got programs like Tux Type, Tux Math, Tux Paint, Stellarium, which is an open source planetarium. Imagine seeing that and enjoying seeing the night sky. Also, Chromium, which is the open source version of Google Chrome, and a number of other browsers, and a whole host of other software. But the stock image of Pixel includes all of that software without you having to add additional software. Once you get a little bit more familiar with the Raspberry Pi and installing other software packages, you'll find how easy it is to add to it. Training. I put training in here because you're probably going to need some. And Raspberry Pi website has a link to training for teachers, for students, for makers, whether you're my age or whether you're a teenager or younger. They have tremendous videos, tremendous resources, and lots of support. I found it really useful and easy to use their website. Now I'm going to do a little shameless self-promotion. These are some articles that I've written recently about Raspberry Pi projects that I've helped to create using how-tos that I've learned about through Raspberry Pi and through social media. One of them is called Internet in a Box. Internet in a Box, and it's actually on this computer, this Raspberry Pi. Internet in a Box is 64 gigs of free and open source educational material. For example, TED Talks, Wikipedia, the entire of Wikipedia offline. Now you're probably going to say, why would I want it offline? Well, if you live in an area not well served by broadband, or if you're in a homeschool situation and the people at the school don't want you to have full access to the internet, Internet in a Box is a great solution for you, because in this computer is all of that information that I told you about, plus Khan Academy Lite. Khan Academy Lite is an incredible collection of educational videos. You've probably heard of Khan Academy and YouTube. All of that is contained on this box. All you need to do is plug it in. It's got the built-in wireless, as I mentioned, and all you have to do, you'll find it says Internet in a Box. You connect your computer to it, and you open up your browser, and you have all of that content to take home with you, literally. The other project that I wrote about, or one of the projects that I wrote about, is I used the Dexter Industries board that I showed you earlier, and I have been working with students in programming Lego Mindstorms robots. But being an open source person who is interested, I'm always keen to how you can use open source in innovative ways. And I found out that using this Dexter Industries add-on board, I could replace the Lego Mindstorms EV3 brick and use Scratch, which is a very intuitive interface for programming. So I created that, and that article, I have a link to that article there. Both links are included on the project. In addition to that, I also recently wrote about how to create a PBX or voice over IP solution using a Raspberry Pi. Really, if you just go to opensource.com and look for Raspberry Pi, and you'll find all of those. In addition to that, that website has an incredible number of articles written by other open source people about Raspberry Pi projects that you probably would be interested in trying. The most recent article I wrote was about using Calibre, an open source ebook reader, which actually can be used as an ebook server. So again, you can download free reading materials in EPUB or in an Amazon format. I typically stay with open educational resources, so non-DRM, in other words, free stuff. So it's really easy to use that in conjunction with Gutenberg.org to get some great free resources, and again, another project. But then again, you may just choose to use the Raspberry Pi as a standalone computer and have a lot of fun without making projects. So resources, you'll find lots of different resources on the Raspberry Pi website. And these are about teaching, learning, and making, because that's really what the Raspberry Pi is about. There are resources for teachers who want to use the Raspberry Pi to teach students. That's why it was created. Raspberry Pi was created in England by a teacher who wanted his students to have inexpensive computers to work with. And so he created the Raspberry Pi. The basic board actually only costs $35. So that's a really inexpensive computer. Now when you add the other things like the micro SD card and the power supply, and that you're getting closer to $70 or $80, but still relatively inexpensive. So check out the resources page on the Raspberry Pi website for more information. You can also, if you're interested, become certified. You can become a certified teacher from the Raspberry Pi Academy. Again, something that you might want to consider if you're a teacher or a professional. Now there are additional resources, and I put these up here because recently Raspberry Pi merged with Coder Dojo. Coder Dojo, C-O-D-E-R-D-O-J-O, which is based in Dublin, Ireland, but they have Coder Dojos around the world. And Coder Dojo has a complete section just on Raspberry Pi, which is mentioned at the link at the bottom, coderdojo.com wiki/Raspberry Pi. So you may want to look at that. There's some great resources out there for you to get started with programming with Python, programming in Raspberry Pi, using other programming languages which you can do on a Raspberry Pi. And I want to thank you for listening to this and sharing in my passion for working with Raspberry Pi. And that is my Twitter name, so you can follow me if you want to. I regularly share about Raspberry Pi.